It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Conversations with Joan. Conversations with Joan will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life's Conversations with Joan. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Conversations with Joan focuses on topics that are important to your life, from health and wellness to professional development to personal well-being. Change makers join me to share their insights, tips, and strategies so you can thrive and live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. Now, let's start talking. Despite having more comfort and knowledge than ever before, many people struggle with mental health challenges such as anxiety and depression. Today's guest, Dr. Anders Hansen, contends that understanding our brain's design, which is built for survival and not constant happiness, is key to addressing today's mental health issues. He joins us to talk about the brain and strategies to cultivate genuine happiness and well-being. Dr. Hansen is a psychiatrist, speaker, and author with his own TV series exploring the human brain. His latest book is The Happiness Cure: Why You're Not Built for Constant Happiness and How to Enjoy the Journey. Welcome, Dr. Hansen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So, Doctor, many people strive to be happy, and yet true happiness eludes many. Why do you believe that's the case?
Well, that's a question that I've thought of my entire adult life. Certainly my entire professional life. We have never been healthier or wealthier than we are today. And still so many seems to be struggling with their mental health. In Sweden, 1 in 8 adults are on antidepressant medication. And I have realized that if you want to understand this, you have to take a step back. You have to understand our evolution. And the fact is that during 99.9% of our time on the planet, half of all humans died before they became teenagers. And we are, of course, the descendants of the ones who did not die. We are the last generation of an unbroken line of survivors. And that means that we have in us defenses against the things that killed humans in the past. And what was that? Well, that was infections, starvation, bleeding, accidents, and murder. To view and then that also means that we don't have any defenses against the things that kills us today, such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, or stroke. And one of the defenses against the things that killed us in the past, I think, is to see the world as dangerous, to constantly plan for the worst, to see danger everywhere. That helped us survive. And to see danger everywhere, well, that's what we call anxiety today. And since about 40% of your risk of you becoming anxious comes from our genes, it's not surprising that people have anxiety. What is surprising, I think, is that the people who don't have anxiety, and maybe they should be diagnosed. And why is this so important to understand? Well, that's because we often view ourselves as damaged, as broken goods, if we suffer from anxiety and depression. And that is completely wrong. Your brain's main goal is not to make you happy. It's not to make sure that you remember the past or that you are creative. It is to take you to tomorrow alive. The brain is a survival machine that evolved to keep us alive. And to see the world as dangerous, well, that kept us alive. So it's a defense mechanism. And when you view it as such, I think you stop looking at yourself as broken. You change perspective.
Do you think some of it, Doctor, from what you just described, we're designed for survival, as you said, and our ancestors had a much more difficult life than we did. They had greater challenges. Do you think some of it can be that life is easier for us, and so now we don't worry so much about physically surviving the way our ancestors did, and so now we're placing our attention in a different area and focusing on happiness? I mean, our ancestors never had time to worry about that. Do you think that could play into it as well?
Absolutely. And it's of course very difficult to even guess how the mental health of our ancestors. They did not leave any psychological evaluations behind, so we can't tell. When groups of humans who still lives like our ancestors as hunters and gatherers, when they're studied today, one can see that depressions and anxiety seems to be rare. It occurs, but it seems to be rare. It's difficult to study that, so it's a big caveat to that, but it seems to be rare. And I think that the reason is that we have a number of things that we know protects us against depression and against anxiety. And what is that? Well, one of these things is physical activity. Physical activity makes us more tolerant to stress, makes us less vulnerable to depressions and anxiety. We also know that sleep protects us against anxiety and depression, and we sleep less today. More people have sleeping problems today. And the most important thing that protects us against anxiety and depressions, well, that's other human beings. Meeting your friends in real life. We are an incredibly social animal, and our social needs evolved in a world where we met face to face. And I think when we spend so much time on our screens, 6-7 hours a day among teenagers, well, then we don't do the things that protects us against depression. Mm-hmm. So it's not that our current modern lifestyle is dangerous by itself. It's that protective factors are being eroded in today's life in a way that we haven't experienced before. And therefore we become more susceptible to depression and anxiety than our ancestors. And of course, there could also be a thing that plays in could also be exactly what you mentioned. Our ancestors did not have the time to think in those terms. They did not think of happiness the way we do. And most of us think of happiness as feeling basically good all the time. And the brain is not wired to feel good all the time. It is wired in a way that positive feelings are short-term. They soon go up in smoke. Why is that? Well, that's because the brain wants to keep us striving. It was never possible for our ancestors to get enough food, to get enough shelter, to get enough protections. So they never evolved anything that says, this is fine. We are constant strivers, and that helped us survive. And that's the reason why short-term feelings are positive feelings are so short-term. They should soon go up in smoke. So I think when we expect ourselves to feel good all the time, we set a goal that is completely unrealistic. We never evolved that way. We go around and feeling miserable and broken because we don't feel good all the time.
Well, and doctor, when we feel that way, we can be very hard on ourselves. We can beat ourselves up for not being able to snap out of it, so to speak. And, that then perpetuates the cycle. And then you have the external, you have all of those forces, the people that look at you like there's something wrong with you, or they're telling you to just snap out of it. We have this stigma. So if we can learn to reframe it as a defense mechanism, how do you think that will help us stop beating ourselves up and have others see it as a different situation than the stigma that they're attaching to it?
I think that helps us realize that depression and anxiety are incredible, powerful states in us. And they had to be that, because otherwise they would not affect humans' behaviors in the past. If you could just snap out of it by saying, feel happy, oh, don't worry, then they would not be powerful enough to motivate us in the first place. So all these cliches about, pull yourself up, it's a joke, and it causes, there's something so sinister to that, I think, because if you're suffering from a depression and someone tells you, snap out of it, it's obviously not that simple. And then you feel worthless because you're not good enough. There is another thing that is worth pointing out in this, and that is inflammation. And inflammation is basically the body's response to all effects on it. If I scratch my arm a bit, it becomes slightly red, and that's inflammation. If I have a viral or bacterial infection in my airways, that also causes inflammation. Now, the level of inflammation in the body increases if we have an infection, and the brain responds by down-regulating our mood and drive. We feel blue. Things feel pointless. We want to go home and hide under the blanket. And that is basically, and the reason why we feel is that the body needs to preserve energy now when we are to fight an infection. And everyone has experienced that, I think. When you start to feel ill, you feel blue. You don't want to do anything. You want to go home. And that makes a lot of sense for our ancestors. However, modern lifestyle factors, such as eating too much processed food, being too sedentary, stressing too much, those things also causes inflammation. And the brain cannot distinguish what caused that inflammation. It thinks inflammation as inflammation. So today's modern lifestyle factors, such as not getting enough sleep, stressing too much, eating too much processed food, and being too sedentary, they activate this defense mechanisms against infections, basically, in us. And if you think that sounds speculatory, that's a good argument, but there's now been an established link between inflammation and depression, and about a third of all depressions seems to come from increased inflammation. So I think, in a way, our modern society is depressiogenic by itself, not just what's being the protective factors that being eroded, but it causes inflammation. And it also causes us to compare ourselves to one another in a way that we haven't done before. Humans are incredibly social, and that's not because it's fun to hang around with your friends. That's because your friends meant survival for our ancestors. To be in group, well, then you were safe. To be isolated, then you were gone. To be excluded from the group was as dangerous as not having food for our ancestors. And that's why we have this incredibly strong drive to read each other's faces and to belong to a group at all costs. Now, historically, and that means that we have always compared ourselves to one another, and we ask ourselves, am I good enough for the group? Now, historically, we have lived in groups or bands of perhaps 100 to 150 individuals, and you compare yourself to perhaps 20 or 30 of them who are around your age and in some ways competitors to you. In today's world, we compare ourselves to the entire planet. And there's always going to be someone who's smarter or better looking or more successful or richer than you are. And then you feel worthless. You feel that I am not good enough for the group. And since you use social media, which today we do, for 3, 4, 5 hours, you get this signal from our surroundings 3, 4, 5 hours a day from Instagrammers, from influencers, and they basically send a signal to you, you're not good enough for the group. And the brain registers that as something that is really dangerous, because being pushed out of the group was dangerous for humans. And then we feel bad about it. And so the most important thing I never learned in med school as a doctor is the fact that the brain has not changed during 10,000 years. Neither has the body, or at least it has changed very little. And that means that we are still adapted to a life on the savannah. That is the life that shaped humans, that shaped not just our physiology, but our psychology.
I think this understanding can be so empowering to someone battling with anxiety or depression, because when you feel that way, as you were saying, we tend to think that everything is wrong with us. But as a starting point to healing, to just understand that instead of believing everything is wrong, to know that really everything is right with the way the brain is behaving, it's doing its job, and to begin thinking that something is actually right, I think that can be a very empowering way to embark on your healing journey.
Absolutely. And I think we always tell stories about ourselves. We are looking for stories and identities that explains ourselves. And these stories become sort of roadmaps for how we view our future. And if we see ourselves as damaged, as broke, then that's a very toxic story. That's a very toxic roadmap for your future. But if instead you're seeing yourself as someone who is functioning, because you are functioning if you're having anxiety, then that changes the roadmap. And having said all of that, I don't want to downplay the how incredibly stressful and horrible anxiety can be. It can be hell, and if you suffer from it, you should seek help. And seeking help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. But we need to take the stigma away. You would never dream of saying to someone with diabetes that they should pull their blood sugar up. It doesn't work like that, of course. And you shouldn't say to someone with a depression that they should pull themselves up. It doesn't work like that. You should encourage them to seek help. So in my books, I want to stress this, shift this perspective on mental health and see it as defense mechanisms, both because that perspective shifting is by itself therapeutic, but you also understand why exercise, why meeting your friends in real life, why sleep, why those things are so important. And when you understand that, when you understand how these things affect the organ where your experience of existing is creating, which is the brain, well, then the stuff that everyone knows about exercise, sleep, and meeting in real life, they will go from being cliches to being something that you want to take seriously. When you understand the logic of it, you will change your behavior. I've seen that so many times, and that's why I wanted to write these books.
Doctor, if it's a defense mechanism, do you think that we are over-medicating people? Should there be a different approach to healing?
That's a very good question. Antidepressant medication is good, and it has saved lives. In Sweden, the number of suicides have dropped by 30% since the 90s, and at least partly that's because of increased use of antidepressant medication. So antidepressant medication is incredibly important, but perhaps we have focused too narrowly on that, and we have not looked so much at the other alternative. And one of them is exercise. Exercise is as efficient as antidepressant medication for mild and moderate depressions. But in order to get that effect, you need to exercise 3 times a week, 45 minutes every time, and it will take 5 to 6 weeks before you get the maximum effect. But that effect is on level with antidepressant medication. Now, to exercise intensely because you have to raise your pulse, that's not possible if you suffer from a depression. That's not going to happen. I can tell that as a psychiatrist, that if you're severely depressed, that will not work. But I think the major role of exercise is not just treating depressions, it's preventing them. And exercise makes us less susceptible to depression. Mm-hmm. The same goes with sleeping enough and meeting your friends in real life. And I think in my profession has been maybe too eager to prescribe medicine and not given sufficient focus to preventing depressions from happening in the first place.
Doctor, earlier in the conversation, you spoke about the pressures we experience through social media and other forms of societal communication. When you look at our children today, our teenagers and even younger, we have kids that are more anxious and depressed than ever before, and the suicide rates are up. What can we be doing to get this messaging to our children? How can we help them to lessen the anxiety and depression they're feeling and to understand what you're teaching?
Well, I think future generations will think that it was crazy to implement so powerful digital tools to children and teenagers without any regulation. So social media needs to be regulated. I think there must be some kind of age limit, perhaps 15 years of age, because when you're a child, and especially when you're a teenager, you're very vulnerable. And to be exposed to the level of comparison that we are today, that's simply not healthy. Now, if you are to tell these things to teenagers, there's different strategies that you could use. And there's been studies done where you have information about tobacco and smoking being presented to teenagers. If you tell them that if you smoke, you increase the risk of lung cancer and emphysema and so on, no one cares about that. When you're a teen, you feel immortal. You don't think what will happen in your life 2 or 3 or 4 decades in the future. It doesn't work. However, if you tell a teenager that tobacco companies, they don't give a damn about you. They don't care about your health. They don't care about whether you feel good or not. They just want to make money out of you. They just make as addictive products as possible so they can squeeze every cent out of you. Well, then you can awake the rebel in a teenager. You can make them think, I'm not going to let any tobacco company squeeze money out of me. You can sort of harness the inner rebel that many of us have when we are teenagers. And I think the same logic can be applied to social media. If you say that social media is dangerous because it makes you compare to other people and you don't exercise, etc., they don't care about that. But if you say these big tech companies, they don't give a damn about you. They don't care whether you feel good, whether you sleep, whether you meet your friends, whether you are healthy. They just want to maximize the time you spend on their platform, because every minute is dollars and cents for them. Well, then again, you can sort of awake this rebel that is in teenagers and perhaps make them realize that they are using it too much. And there was a study done in Sweden that shows that the majority of teenagers in Sweden wanted to cut down on their screen use, but they just couldn't. They were not able to do it, but they wanted to do it. And that is, I think, because tech companies have made these products so incredibly addictive that it's very, very, very hard to put them down. And therefore, I think we need to create distance to our digital devices. We can't have them around. We can't have them in the classroom. We can't have them in the bedroom. We can't have them in the meeting room, etc., because they are so seductive. We will pick them up. It's not really, it's not more strange than we all realize that we can't have candy all around. Then we will eat it. We're wired to eat things that contains a lot of calories. And when we have candy around, our brains want to eat that. That helps us survive. And from that, we realize that we can't have candy around. And I think the same logic can be applied to screens. We can't have them around all the time because they are so addictive.
Do you have any advice to help someone break that addiction? Because that's such a wonderful point. And would someone go through some type of a withdrawal when they try?
Yes, they often do when you cut down the screen time. But that just lasts for a week or two, and then people usually feel better. And many studies shows that when you cut down your screen time, and especially with social media, you feel better. And it's not about excluding it completely, because we need these things, of course. We need our screens to stay in touch with our surroundings. But when we cut it down to perhaps 2 hours a day, that's unscientific, but something like that, then we will feel better. And my main advice to everyone is learn more about these things. Learn about how the brain functions, learn about how sleep and exercise, etc., how important they are, and learn about the mechanisms in our brains that are being hijacked by social media. Because when you learn these things, you want to make changes.
The book is The Happiness Cure, Why You're Not Built for Constant Happiness, and How to Enjoy the Journey. Doctor, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
I have a homepage called drandershansen.com. So you could find more information there.
And Doctor, in our final moments, what is the takeaway? What would you like to leave our listeners with?
To stress that we are still hunters and gatherers. We humans are still adapted to life on the savannah. We never evolved to be happy. We evolved to survive. But there are things that we can do. But we must learn about that. We cannot just follow our instincts. Our instincts helped us survive in a world where there was very little resources. But those instincts doesn't make us happy in a world of overabundance. And by learning this and eventually seeing it being played out in your life, you will make smarter choices. I have certainly done that myself, and many of my patients have done that.
Dr. Hansen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the show informative. At Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, we believe that knowledge is power. Take what you've learned, apply it, and live your best life now. Remember that the information provided is the opinion of our guest and should never replace the advice of a professional who knows your personal situation. If you'd like more information, visit our website, cyacyl.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on the site, listen to past shows on demand, read our digital articles, and be sure to subscribe to our mailing list. Until next time, this is Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.